The transition for me was went to a high school of 2,000 students, and there were two minority students in my class. So there were two of us who graduated from high school. And when I went to the University of Washington, I automatically gravitated to the other students of color. Academically, it was challenging because there were the large classes, some of them 400 students, I can't remember what they call that theater style, and then they would have the small laboratory classes. So it was difficult adjusting to that type of education environment. So again, meeting with people that you were comfortable with and common with was very helpful. And then I met Eddie Demings, who became my tutor in English because I was having some challenges in satire at the time. I don't think I've ever understood it and never will. But Eddie was very helpful and with me passing my English classes at the UW. Everything that was happening in the country at the time began to make sense. I began to identify with being black. I began to understand the different movements around the country with the Black Panthers, with SNCC. And when I was preparing to go to college, my high school guidance counselor told my parents that it was best that I not go to school in the South as I wanted, because he felt that I would get in trouble in the South because I was too outspoken. I didn't see myself that way, but that's the way they saw me. So I guess that was germinating there, and that was part of my personality and also part of the education I had, that you could be outspoken and challenge things. So that's how I came into the University of Washington and a lot of the activities. I remember attending a number of BSU meetings, whether they were in the hub or where they were. I was not part of one of the thinkers of the time, but more of a supporter, I would say. I was on campus, but I was not in the president's office. I was aware of it. We knew it was going to happen, but they only selected, I think, certain people. It was a little bit scary, but it was like the norm to me at the time, because the general feel was that unless you really made your point and made it in a way that people that listened to you, that you interfered with the normal course of things, that you really weren't going to be taken seriously. And talking only goes so far. We were naive, and we just followed and pursued things that we felt passionate about. There were some other meetings off campus that I had attended. And I remember that there were police patrolling the area. There was always a threat, it seemed, that we had more protection on campus in a certain way than we had off campus, because if you were having a meeting that somehow implied it might have been political, then we were heavily scrutinized by the police. When you're in such a small minority, I never got the sense that the university was protecting me in any particular kind of way. I mean, I had more or less the same rights, I guess, as to be able to attend classes and live on campus as I did and so forth as other students, but I didn't get any sense that they were looking out for me, and I really got that sense academically that, it was neither here nor there, I could go or come. We might have been a little bit more secure than off campus, but I'm not exactly sure how they perceived it, because there was so much, there's so much infiltration. You could have students who were actually Panthers, you could have people who were infiltrating all types of groups. So I can't say how the University of Washington saw us. As a result of the sit-ins and the demands that the BSU made, the following fall, there was the Office of Student Affairs that was developed, and then I was involved in a recruitment project of minority students to campus. And we used some pretty unsophisticated means of recruiting students. That was anybody who thought that they might have wanted to go to college could potentially come to college at that time, because they opened up, I don't know how many positions or slots, but they opened up enrollment to a broad stroke of minority students. So then I became a dormitory counselor at Lander Hall, which had a pretty infamous reputation at the time. And we, as I said, they were unorthodox recruiting methods, and we recruited all over the state of Washington. And a number of students came who were sincere and really wanted to get an education and really graduated and went to go on to graduate school. And others, you know, like I think in any other type of educational environment, spent a semester or a quarter or two at that time and left, or dropped out, or might be probably asked to leave. So there was a real kind of upheaval at that time. And also the courses that were offered changed drastically, because then you could take, I know I took a number of classes in, this is a number of years ago, so I can't remember the names of all the classes, but in Black history and Black literature, there were a number of classes. In fact, I didn't take, I think I dropped all of the ancient history classes that I'd had, enrolled in and took the Black history classes and all the classes that were offered. In retrospect, I could go back and study a little bit of ancient history now. I missed it, but it was more important to me at the time to gain some of that knowledge and information and education that I hadn't received in my earlier years of education. By the time I was graduating, and I was like 21, I graduated in 1971, I was referred to as the old school at the University of Washington, and that was because they had all these students from California, and their entry into school and their experience there was very different than our experience was. So that I can understand that at this point, at that time, it seemed that things just changed very quickly and very rapidly to get to the point that you're on one side of really being a part of something that initiated change, to the point that you're now looked upon as being part of an old movement. So I remember David Lorenz came to the university, I think that the following fall, the fall of '68, there were a number of other professors and graduate students. There was much more diversity on campus. So there was an impact. There was definite outcome from the efforts, of however controversial the actions might have been, but there were measurable outcome as far as I'm concerned. I know there were more classes that were offered. There was actually a department set up. I don't know if it was African American Studies. I think it was even got to the point that you could get a major in African American Studies. Once things settled down in the late '60s, and then we're moving into the Cambodian War and the Vietnam War and conflicts, and then by graduating in '70, '71, then you're specialized, so less information in terms of what was happening in other departments. And I was an anthropology major. My minor was education, so I really worked from my minor. And I had a professor who wanted me to go to Rutgers University to get my master's, but I wasn't ready to study anymore at the time. I think that black women in particular had a more focal point, not just in the university, but I think in the city, in other organizations. Details and specifics of women in positions I can't remember, but sometimes it's hard to measure because it's just a small movement can start something that then builds, and there are other women that step in and take advantage of those opportunities. I know this isn't totally directly, but I know a friend was saying that our generation was a change generation, and a lot of us directly may not have always seen the results of it, but other people benefited from it more than a lot of ways than we did. I was working in a not-for-profit organization, Neighborhood Youth Corps. There was one other person on staff, an African American, and then I was hired, and I think another man was there, but I might have been the first woman. No, and another woman was there. Her name was Sahai Lorenz. She was in their occupational department, but I guess because I was graduating from college and going into the workforce, I didn't really realize that there were not a lot of other women of color or minorities in positions at the time. The educational process was not what was happening in the classroom, but what was happening amongst the students and the movement at the time. It was things as simple as I said, I went to all-white high school in Tacoma, Washington. It's something as simple as I had to take gym, I had to take swimming class for 2 periods when I was in high school, and my hair got nappy. So the acceptance of who you are as a African American, you have nappy hair, you don't have straight hair, and to accept that, and the fact that my features were different became acceptable and a norm for me. You know, whether somebody else liked it, I didn't really care, but I projected that. This is who I am. I don't have to change myself to make anybody like me or accept me. And pretty much I've gone forward in my adult life that way. Once or twice I tried doing the straight hair thing, and it didn't work for me. And this is, I know, an aside, but when I first moved to New York, I went to what you would call a salon on Fifth Avenue, and they suggested that I needed to tame my hair, I needed to do something to control it. And from a beauty aesthetic, I understand that now. They might tell you the same thing. But that was an insult to me. And I said, you know, I'd rather dread than do, you know, what you're suggesting. So that's a small thing, but in a lot of ways, it has shaped who I am. And I probably don't even acknowledge it as much as I should, but I think it really shaped who I am and going forward, to the point that I did get a master's in business administration at Atlanta University, but couldn't and wouldn't work for any period of time in a corporate setting because it wasn't a good fit for me. It was too controlled, and I think not-for-profit works better for me because I feel that I have more of an opportunity of making some kind of difference rather than being going along with somebody else's plan and making money for them. Just doesn't fit.